Hey folks, thanks for watching. It's Tuesday, August 12th, and I wanted to start with the 500 millibar winds and the heights across North America this morning. I think this paints a pretty familiar story, one where we have seen ridging build in somewhere to our west, either over the Pacific Northwest, at times over the Four Corners. Today it's more so based just off the coast here west of Washington, west of Oregon. This has helped produce at times a very strong North Pacific high. As much as we've talked about the Bermuda high this summer, that North Pacific high, which flows counterclockwise in this direction here, has been strong as well. And that has kept persistent onshore flow in California, San Francisco, down through San Diego, like Oxnard, California. Monterey has seen one of its coldest summers on record because that strong North Pacific high, the winds are flowing around that clockwise. And that's pushing flow toward California. The ocean temperatures are often cool this time of year just off the coast. And so that marine layer near the coast of California is getting pushed inland. There's mist, there's been fog. San Francisco saw one of its wetter Julys on record just with persistent mist and fog blowing over the city. That has been one story we've watched. We've also seen this ridging to our northeast start to build heat and drought into areas here like New York over toward Pennsylvania at times, even West Virginia. And so that has been a persistent story. And what goes up in the atmosphere, what I mean by that, like these ridges that are going up, we tend to get the atmosphere going down in other areas, certainly in between. So over the middle part of the country, like we're seeing this morning, we've seen troughs, and that has brought severe weather. These derecho-like events through the plains in the upper Midwest, or actually, if we jump over and look, we're seeing another one of these bow echo events move through Wisconsin. This just prompted severe thunderstorm warnings near Milwaukee. It's about 6:20. I think this has just moved through that area, maybe getting turned like Sheboygan along the coast of Michigan there. This quarter has seen too much rain in recent days. We don't need any more of it. Flash flooding was a significant story just a few days ago in Milwaukee and then toward kind of like Dubuque, Iowa area as well. So I'm hoping this pushes further toward the east today because there's some acreage in here that really needs some of the rain getting toward the east. And we are going to see this trough pushing toward the east. But critically, I'm just going to spoil like the middle part of this forecast here. We're flipping this pattern around. Like this trough here is going to position across New England, and we're going to get another trough diving down out of the kind of the Alaska area toward the Pacific Northwest. And then I'm going to say the same thing. What goes down in the atmosphere to the east and the west is going to go up in between, and we're likely to build a ridge in between those two as we get out toward this weekend and then early next week. So we're really watching that pattern flip kind of over the next 7 days. In the meantime, if we look at the all hazards map, we can see heat advisories over New England, heat advisories over the Pacific Northwest. There is that kind of common pattern that we've seen this summer, certainly getting toward late summer. In between, unfortunately, continued air quality alerts over the upper Midwest with the Canadian wildfire smoke. There's those severe storm warnings I was talking about, and then some flash flood concerns here over kind of the Oklahoma and Texas area with some lingering slow thunderstorms. I just showed those a minute ago, but we'll look at those again. You can see very slow-moving showers and storms prompting that flood watch. The southeast has stayed busy. That's going to continue to be the case this week. I think this is finally starting to break a little bit from just how oppressive some of the crazy rainfall values we saw on the Florida Peninsula here just recently. We can see that if we jump over and look at the last 10 days of observed precipitation and look at Georgia, South Carolina, Florida. Saw some of those wild values toward the southwest portion of the peninsula over toward the Panhandle. Then the upper Midwest, the Central Plains up toward the Canadian Prairie. I mean, this has been the storm track this summer. And you can see on the periphery, there's that double-barreled ridge, right, where we've had a lack of precipitation out west. We've seen drought build into this area here, and we've seen a lack of precipitation here in New England over toward Connecticut, to Maine, even into portions of Ohio, West Virginia now, getting in on some of this concern, and drought slowly building in this quarter here, hoping that we see some of this troughing push further to the east here. I will get into that forecast in just a minute. I did want to touch briefly on the Central Pacific. It looks pretty quiet here this morning. That's a big change from about a week and a half ago. But we do see this is actually still hurricane. I think they're going to downgrade it pretty shortly here, but this is still Hurricane Henriette. I mentioned this last week. This has been a very anomalous storm in that it actually strengthened as it went toward the northwest, which is not a common evolution for storms because typically water temperatures decrease as you move further to the north. In fact, we typically see cold water temperatures just to the east of Hawaii, which protects that island from more consistent landfalls of stronger hurricanes. But Henriette strengthened as it moved north. And the reason for that is something Eric talked about quite a bit yesterday. It's just all this warmth in the central North Pacific. Now, this is the anomaly map, so it's not showing you the absolute temperatures. But just east of Hawaii, we have cold temperature anomalies. So Henriette was struggling here. It got further to the north, hit some of this warmer water and said, hey, I'm a hurricane now. And that, I can tell you, is kind of a bizarre thing we don't see a lot. And it just shows you how kind of rare and anomalous this North Pacific warmth is. For another kind of example of how bizarre this is, Japan. It reached its all-time record high temperature for the country at 107 degrees Fahrenheit just recently. I'm not going to try to pronounce that prefecture, but man, that is some serious heat. Again, likely connected back to this North Pacific heat. Now, we often see what we call this negative PDO signature, which is at record low values right now. It has to be with some of this wild heat here. We often see that in coincidence with La Niña. And so Eric showed a lot of those seasonal forecasts yesterday, the precipitation forecast. I'm going to see. I don't know. Let's see if I have one of these up. Yeah. This is for September, October, November. This kind of more precipitation in this corridor here, maybe more over the Midwest, and then drier over the southern half. I mean, that is La Niña like to a T. And if I blowed this up and showed you globally, that consistency holds true to other areas of the country. So things are looking La Niña-y now. But what's I find a little bit curious is how warm we are here, and that some of the forecasts for La Niña, this from the NME, which just came out showing a number of different model runs, the average of all these runs is in this black dashed line. And right now, those forecasts, at least if we just take the mean of them, show only a weak La Niña, which means that a number of these forecasts actually show a very, very weak La Niña, almost that we wouldn't even be able to call it, something like ENSO neutral, slightly leaning toward La Niña. Now, there are some like the CFS, which are much more aggressive. If we got down to negative 1.5 degrees Celsius, that would be a moderate to strong La Niña. So that is still a possibility. There's a wide envelope here. But despite all the warmth in the North Pacific, I'm not seeing in these dynamical models, which try to guess where we're going in this La Niña this winter, jumping out and going toward an extreme La Niña scenario here. I don't know if that has to do with the fact that we've already seen a number of La Niñas just this decade. Can the ocean run out of cold temperatures in the Central Pacific? Frankly, I don't know the answer to that question. I would think maybe not, because it just has this persistent source of upwelling here off the west coast of South America. So it can just continue to upwell that, I would think, as long as the atmosphere plays along. And at least right now, as it stands in early August, the atmosphere is playing along with a La Niña-like state here as we get further toward the fall. So that is the expectation right now. But I'm, again, along with Eric, just kind of thinking through this North Pacific warmth, what it means not only for this fall and winter, where at least right now we think it's going to produce more La Niña-like conditions, potentially a drier area in the middle part of the country, also going in, frankly, to next summer in 2026 or 2027, where we haven't seen this kind of widespread drought materialize. We've seen pockets of it. We just talked about drought concerns in West Virginia, up through New York, some areas of the West, but at least in the middle part of the country, some of these kind of larger growing regions here that we often focus on. Are we less concerned about drought in 26 and 27 if this heat lingers? That's kind of a question mark that we're going to be digging into in the coming weeks. I did want to jump over and show this is near Rochester, New York. I mentioned that drought there. This is a pretty cloudy area of the country east of the Great Lakes with the colder waters and some of the elevation here. And we're actually looking at year-to-date solar. And so this graph would look just like I drew it if we had clear skies every day. So like over Phoenix. Now, New York, this area of the country does not, has plenty of cloudy days. And so those cloudy kind of cold precipitation days, I'm going to call them like cold days, quote unquote, are these big drops in these accumulated solar. And you can see from like April, May into June, plenty for like every quote unquote warm day, they had a cold day. So this was a late plant in this area here in the far eastern Corn Belt. But you notice something kind of changing here as they went through the last 2 months, and that is much more sun, a lot of these, like a lack of very cloudy days. And this graph almost looks like that if you were to average it, whereas it should, if every day was clear, look more like that. And this is indicative of that ridging over New England, over the Canadian Maritimes, bringing more heat and water stress into that area here. And now this time of year, we're predictably losing daylight and we're losing a little bit of sun angle every day in mid-August. And so this graph starts predictably decreasing despite, intermix of weather in between that with clouds and rainfall. And so I was curious, I looked up and then plugged it into ChatGPT to check my work really quickly. How much energy, so we can see the year-to-date solar radiation, on average, are we losing in mid-August? So we can actually see if we just kind of eyeball this, it looks like we're losing a few megajoules per meter squared, maybe like a half or quarter of one per day. It's hard to say. So I plugged this all in and I said, if we could capture all the energy that's coming down, if you think about like the perfect, super efficient solar panel in 1 square meter, so think of like a yardstick metered out or squared out, If we could capture all of that energy, how much are we losing per day with the just 2.5 minutes less of daylight per day that we're getting right now in roughly like the mid latitudes of the United States? So I curiously plugged this all into ChatGPT. There's a new one out. I wanted to see if it could do it. I had to check some of my work, and as far as I know, it is correct. Because I tried to look up a lot of this and got some similar answers, doing it in a few different ways. That we're losing, try to put this in a frame of reference, about 30 minutes of 60-watt light bulb runtime per day with just the 2.5 minutes less of sunshine, and then that like slight change in the solar angle. Now this is going to peak near the equinox, which is in late September, with like 45 minutes of light bulb runtime lost per day. If you were to run a 60-watt light bulb on all the energy you could store from the sun on a given day, you'd have 30 minutes less every day here in August to run that. Kind of a neat way to think about how much energy we're losing just with that little bit of daytime or daylight change per day. All right, I already kind of spoiled this part of the forecast, but that's fine. I think it's the biggest story right now. I'm going to make this forecast for the ECMWF valid about when I'm talking. So let's do like 6 to 7 a.m. This morning. There's that trough over the middle part of the country. This is going to be moving east over the coming days, and we're trying to squeeze some precipitation out of the lingering front that it's laying down across the Mid-South into New England. But as we go into Thursday, see another system here coming through the prairie into Friday morning. But look at the ridge building into here in the middle part of the country, still over New England as we go through the weekend. Now kind of entrenching somewhere over Springfield, Illinois, maybe like St. Louis on Sunday. Now starting to push up into the Canadian Prairie by Monday the 18th. And then critically, I'm putting the like big pin in this on Wednesday morning, August 20th. And I'm doing that for a few reasons. One, we saw the ridge here. We called it the Springfield, Illinois ridge sometime this weekend. It has quickly pushed off to the west. Eric mentioned yesterday this transient heat this year, where we've seen heat build in, and as quickly as it builds in, it pushes further to the west or pushes to the east. But by Wednesday of next week, we've replaced that New England trough. We just looked at that solar irradiance in that area, or we replaced that ridge with a trough, and then over the northwest, we've replaced that ridge with a trough as well, and we get that ridging in between. What goes down has to come up somewhere. Now, critically, you're like, Matt, we got to talk about this, and we do. This is Tropical Storm Erin, which on the ECMWF model has strengthened into a major hurricane at this point by next week, and this is another big story we'll have to watch. And what will determine if this is an impact to the East Coast or as an extratropical storm near Canada is this ridge here east of Bermuda. If that ridge stays strong, it's going to steer and push that hurricane. This ridge is going to determine where this hurricane goes. And on this ECMWF model, this is one of the strongest model runs in terms of that ridge. And it's why that this ECMWF forecast gets the storm very close to the East Coast before it ultimately at the last second recurves. If this trough wasn't here over New England and we had this pattern that we're dealing with this week, with this ridging stretched all the way down through Florida, that hurricane would track along that ridge all the way up into the Gulf. And so we should be somewhat thankful for this pattern flip, because this trough is trying to convince this hurricane to join it on its march through the North Atlantic. You see that? It's kind of that handoff. It says, hey, you're coming with me, and we're going to swing up and head toward Greenland. So that is that critical juncture. Again, I'm putting the pin in like Wednesday of next week when this storm is going to decide, maybe like Tuesday to Wednesday, which way it's going to go. And it's all dependent on the strength of that ridge here. Now, as we get out, I'm going to take this further into the forecast. We are seeing this transient heat rate. We saw it try to build into the plains and the prairie. It keeps pushing west even out toward next weekend. So we're getting well out into the forecast here. But a number of these long-range models bringing cooler temperatures in shortly after the heat of next week, and they're pushing some of this ridging further toward the west. We'll look at that kind of at the end of this. But keep an eye on that as well. I did want to jump over and look at the 3-kilometer NAM to get an idea of where that precipitation is going to be falling today. I'm going to take this forecast in through today and take it to like 6 p.m., 7, 8 p.m. Tuesday evening. And we can see a wide area of precipitation, thunderstorms here over central Illinois, getting over towards southern Michigan. Not seeing like significant 1-inch swaths here, but we need some of this rainfall to get down into the eastern Corn Belt and up into New England, and even areas of the Mid-South here toward Arkansas, Tennessee, northern Mississippi. Not quite seeing it in bulk here today, unfortunately. Now, as we go through the day tomorrow on Wednesday, get toward like 4 or 5 p.m., you can see some decent storm coverage here across New England, Vermont, New Hampshire, eastern Ontario, over toward Quebec, getting a little bit over into New York here, Indiana, Ohio, western Tennessee, central Kentucky, hoping we get some showers here in Arkansas. but this is not widespread, 1-inch precip. This is spotty. Some areas likely to get up near kind of 3/4 of an inch. Some areas are going to miss out. This kind of goes through Pennsylvania. This is tomorrow evening before pushing out of the area. So not a, healthy wide dose of rainfall. We'll look at some of the, we'll just jump over and look at that now. You can see the WPC. Anywhere from like Little Rock, looking at 1/4 inch over towards central Tennessee, 3/4 inches over toward like Rochester area, 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch. Some areas of Illinois, Indiana getting up near a 1/2 inch as well. So this rain is increasingly needed given some of the dry stretch and the heat, right, that's forecast to build in here. We'll talk about that heat in just a second. Look at the Storm Prediction Center. Their largest risk concern, at least right now over the next few days, is looking at Thursday in a very familiar area, Red River in the northern Minnesota, eastern North Dakota. If we look at the WPC, their rainfall outlook, you can see just marginals with a few slights in here over the eastern part of the country. So not widespread rainfall event occurring over the next 48 hours, but we are seeing some spotty storms and showers, hopefully bringing some precipitation. And the reason I mention that, if we look at the soil moisture deficits just estimated from NASA here, you can see Ontario, Quebec, New England, parts of New York, Michigan, northern Indiana, stretching into eastern Illinois, portions of Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. I mean, this is a corridor, and we could almost pull this all the way back into Arkansas and like the middle Mississippi River Valley, where we're looking for some of that rainfall because those temperatures, take the forecast forward, there's that trough bringing that precipitation through over the next 2 days. That's keeping temperatures down a little bit. But with that ridge building in over right Springfield, Illinois, St. Louis, that heat is returning to this quarter here. We're talking low 90s, maybe mid 90s in Tennessee near Little Rock, low 90s in Illinois, up to high 80s in New York. I mean, additional heat stress for this corridor here. So hoping to get some rainfall before that heat builds in. Did want to look at the ECMWF precipitation forecast. I'm going to take this quickly. We can see some of that southeast activity. This takes us through Wednesday evening. There's that showers and precip heading off toward the eastern half of the country. Continuing a little bit on Thursday in the Carolinas through the southeast, there is that potential severe weather we're looking at in Minnesota and the Dakotas. Some of that lingering, maybe Iowa and Wisconsin on Friday, but not significantly. And that's when that ridge starts building into this corridor here. You notice at least by like Saturday, still seeing some of that southeast precip, some little waves trying to sneak through here in northern Michigan, but we're starting to kind of clear out this area in the middle part of the country. And even as we get out toward like Sunday, starting to see a reduction in that Gulf Coast heavy precipitation signal. There's still some of it, kind of predictable daytime storms, but not seeing quite as much of it. We do see another potential rain maker. This is the Dakotas into Minnesota, Iowa, as we go through the evening next Sunday. So play that one forward again. That pushes up into Minnesota, the eastern Dakotas, into Wisconsin on Monday. But underneath that, continuing a dry stretch in this area here, which is why, again, over the next 48 hours, hoping to get some rainfall into that corridor here. We've seen in that area some drought classifications begin to crop up, even as far west as like towards Champaign County, over into Missouri. And again, with that heat coming, we want to get some precipitation down on it. I mentioned the transient nature of that heat. If we look at our temperature panel here, so the bottom or the left side of this image is the 5-day anomaly, so out over the next 5 days from the 3 different models, top to bottom. As we go toward the right, we go 5 to 10 days and then 10 to 15. And we can see that the 5 to 10 days, essentially getting out toward next week, we see this heat build into the middle part of the country. And then quickly pushing to the west after that, so up toward the Canadian Prairie, and then over toward the Continental Divide as well. Staying on the cooler side in between that with some of these waves coming through the Dakotas and the upper Midwest. But as we go out to 10 to 15 days, we really see a pretty decent cold signal through much of like the eastern half of the country, even from the AFS here, kind of agreeing with that. So that's that ridging that's been transient pushing off to the west. So heat staying entrenched here over the western U.S., save for, again, that coast of California. You can even see it here from how far out. It's this tiny little strip of blue, colder temperatures here. That heat staying west near the end of August and some colder temperatures getting back into this quarter here. Unfortunately, I think this is going to be cold and dry for some of the areas that I just mentioned here, needing some of that rain, but at least we won't be seeing some of that intense summertime heat. We can see this from the ECMWF ensemble. If we take the forecast out, this is like August 23rd, where more of that heat is to the west, and that's going to allow cold air to spill out into the eastern part of the country here. If we look at the 8 to 14 day temperature outlook, this takes us from the 19th through the 25th of August, with the highest confidence for that heat near Salt Lake City. More seasonal temperatures for the eastern part of the country, kind of the plains east over toward Pennsylvania and New England. But that precipitation pattern with that ridge building in out west could see some tick up in the monsoon. Drier for the Pacific Northwest, but drier for the middle part of the country, continuing to see slightly above average wet signal for the southeast, the eastern seaboard. Again, some of this, I mean, frankly, 19th to the 25th, dependent on Hurricane Erin, where its exact track is. If we looked at the 8 to 14 day precipitation outlook, I'm going to pick on like the ECMWF ensemble. You can see where they're getting some of that 8 to 14 day precipitation contour from. There's that tri-corridor here in the middle part of the country. Some monsoon activity, drier over the Pacific Northwest, but wetter in this corridor here. And then there is likely Hurricane Erin pushing through this area here. So there's Erin now, tropical storm currently. It did, unfortunately, the Cabo Verde Islands cause, unfortunately, fatalities here, even as just a developing system. It has moved to the west here today, even at the very beginning. You know, we can even see it starting to impact those 500 millibar winds way over here. You can see this little wave in the pattern here. But if I jump back and show you it currently on satellite, it is very weak. So no kind of current tropical thunderstorm activity around it. You can actually see it's exposed something of like a little spinny eye there underneath that tropical storm. So if we actually pull up, we'll see if we get sunshine on it here this morning. So you can actually see all the way down to the ocean underneath those thunderstorm anvils there that have now dissipated. So a weak storm right now. The expectation is for that to change, unfortunately, as it gets further toward the west, developing into a hurricane by Thursday of this week, over the weekend, potentially by Sunday getting to an M. That is a major hurricane per the National Hurricane Center. Hoping it stays more toward the north. As it stays toward the north, and hoping it increases the chance of staying away from land, save for the island of Bermuda here. But if it stays near the southern end of this track, suddenly you're talking about a potential landfall risk for the lesser or the greater Antilles here, getting toward the end of the weekend into Monday. Now, the reason that it looks so weak right now and it's getting stronger, pretty simple and similar to what we looked at with Henriette, along with some wind shear changes. Those ocean temperatures, the central tropical Atlantic right now, where it is west of the Cabo Verde Islands here, we have some cold ocean temperatures. I mean, these aren't really supportive. We get down near 26 degrees Celsius, not necessarily supportive of tropical development. We're going to see that change as it gets up toward 27, and then 28 is that kind of big kicker where we really see more significant development. And then you can think even further west. We know it's heading into somewhere into this corridor here where we have those warm bathwater-like temperatures, and an increase in strength is very likely. At this point, it's just a question of where it's going. Now, again, I made the case at the beginning of this video that exact track, you can see the envelope here from the ECMWF ensemble is pretty wide when we get out into next week, but they're colored by intensity. So you get up into these kind of red colors here, and you're talking about a major hurricane on that red to pink. And so we're watching these closely. A lot of these forecasts show a major hurricane sometime next week, with a wide envelope of possibilities, some taking it as far west as like, getting even up toward Jacksonville. Some of these over more so Bermuda, a lot of them in between, which is the most likely scenario right now, but it's depending on the strength of that ridge near Bermuda as we get into next week. The GFS, if we just, again, put a pin in Wednesday morning, August 20th, that ridge is the weakest on the GFS, and that has allowed the hurricane to take a more northward jog and catch up to this trough sooner. So we see that track on this weak ridge from the GFS forecast. And I like this scenario because it keeps it just far enough away from the Lesser Antilles to prevent impacts. It keeps it away from land, but unfortunately for Bermuda, that puts it right in the crosshairs. So that is one scenario here. This is the bad for Bermuda, good for the eastern U.S., good for the Lesser Antilles and the Greater Antilles forecast. If we jump over and look at the AIFS, if I take this forecast back, we can see that ridge is pushing further to the west compared to the ECMWF. You see how much further west that ridge is? And that hurricane getting even closer to the eastern seaboard before turning. And this scenario sneaks this hurricane in between land from the AFS. It merges with that trough near Greenland, heads off in the North Atlantic. So that is another scenario we're watching. This one takes it very close to the Lesser Antilles, very close to the Bahamas before strengthening further. But it really doesn't strengthen until it gets out over some of that warmer bathwater in the open ocean and then sneaks between Bermuda and the U.S. The ECMWF showed this forecast at the beginning. You can see even by Tuesday night, that ridge very strong, almost connecting over toward the eastern U.S., and that's going to push that hurricane even further to the west on this model. This is the closest one of those three right now to North Carolina. And again, strengthening more intensely as it gets north of Bahama into the warm ocean temperatures that we just talked about. So we need to keep an eye on this. There's still a wide envelope of possibility. Cannot rule out a landfall all the way toward the Carolinas or North Carolinas. Definitely need to watch Bermuda for the more of that eastward jog. And then here the Lesser Antilles up near Puerto Rico for this kind of corridor here for a more southerly jog. We'll need to watch that areas here, maybe even the Bahamas as well. This forecast is going to change. The strength of that ridge, the exact position of it, it's going to get more narrowed down from these models over the next kind of 3 to 4 days. And we'll be able to pinpoint a little bit more accuracy where this is expected to go right now. But really, again, a wide envelope of possibilities and can't rule out a eastern U.S. impact at this point right now. I'll leave it there today. Eric will talk with you all tomorrow, and thanks for watching.